I am kicking off this week's news with a new study that is probably one of the most interesting that I have come across so far. And it's probably because it's not something that I really had thought about there being a connection between until I heard about this study. And now I'm really curious to learn more about it. Now, the original study is from Rutgers and was published in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry. And basically, the study looked at fine motor skills and future language development. And basically what they found was that 77.5% of the children in their study who had extreme fine motor delays when they were small ended up having continued language disabilities later in childhood and then into adulthood. On the other hand, 69.6% of the children who did not have extreme fine motor delays went on to overcome their language barriers by late childhood or young adulthood. The lead researcher, Vanessa Ball, said, "Language development is complex. Many interventions for young children with autism focus on language intervention or social skills. But our findings indicate it may be useful for clinicians and parents to assess fine motor skills and build opportunities for these skills to be further developed in order to help with language development." Now, the initial study was on the small side. It focused on 86 children with autism. So, I mean, it wasn't tiny, it just wasn't like one of the huge studies where they're analyzing a huge number of children from all over the world. But they followed these children from their second birthday until they were 19. But then a Canadian study replicated the first study with 181 children and followed the children from the ages of 2 to 4 until the age of 10, and they found the exact same thing in a completely independent study. So I guess my biggest question when I heard her conclusion about strengthening fine motor skills to strengthen language later on was whether correlation equals causation, whether the fine motor delay is causing the lack of language later on, or whether it's just children who are going to have a more severe language delay also tend to have a much more severe fine motor delay. Because I could see that being the case, and that almost seems more likely to me. I mean, I think it's great for everybody to get OT who needs it and to work on fine motor skills. And where we are, that's really a thing. All three of our girls have had years and years of OT, and all three of them have worked on fine motor skills. I'm not sure though that any of them would have been said to have an extreme fine motor delay, because both Maggie and Tessie are, I mean, they always come up as having a fine motor delay on the questionnaires, but they can also do some really complex things like build towers. Tessie can build Lego cats and puzzles and do all sorts of other things that are pretty complicated. So I don't think that they have extreme fine motor delays, and I'm not sure how much of their fine motor delays are just not wanting to do what they're being asked to do sometimes. Anyways, so I thought that study was really interesting, and I would love to learn more about it. I'm just really curious about the conclusions that they're reaching with the data that they have. The next news I want to talk about today was an article that was especially interesting to me in The Atlantic. It was written by Sydney Fussell in the technology section, and the title is "YouTube Videos Are a Gold Mine for Health Researchers." Okay, you can probably already see why I'm interested. We have published close to 500 videos at this point, and most of them are about autism. The article starts with a study at England's King's University, and it was a behavioral study that was published about children with autism. But in the study, they didn't interview children or administer any questionnaires at all. In fact, what they did was they taught an artificial intelligence system to look at videos of children with autism from YouTube. And the artificial intelligence then studied the body movements of children with autism, and it used it to classify their behaviors as either atypical or typical. There is some debate on the ethics of using videos without consent in medical studies. The issue is still controversial because there isn't just an easy way to get that consent with the large amounts of videos that are actually out there. But at this point, there are enormous amounts of potential training data for these systems to use in studies out there. And so I have a feeling that this is going to be coming up a lot more in the near future, and hopefully they'll be able to come up with some sort of consensus on how to handle the ethics of the situation. Honestly, personally, it doesn't bother me if our videos are used in that way, but that's probably pretty obvious because we've been involved in a lot of studies. All in all, the issue is a lot more complicated than I thought it was when I started reading that article. This was a hard one for me to read. It is a story out of North Carolina about a 13-year-old with autism who is having a hard time on a school bus. He became agitated with the bus driver, and as the bus driver began to pull away, he hit the bus driver over the head with his water bottle, and the bus driver slammed on the brakes. This caused the boy to be thrown into the windshield of the bus. He had to be taken to the hospital in a neck brace, and the police came and got his mother. Both the driver and the boy are okay. His mother has been asking the school to give him special transportation to and from school. Unfortunately, the school has been insisting that this special needs bus is only for children who have physical disabilities. At his old school, he did ride a different bus, and his mother says that that was included in his IEP when he was transferred over, that he would continue to ride a specialized bus. My guess is with specialized restraints, because that's usually part of it, but I'm, again, just guessing there from my own personal experience. For those of you who don't know, there's all sorts of different restraints for kids who are riding those buses. Some of them are as simple as a buckle buddy that just can go over a seat belt, and like some of them have like I think the ones that they first started out to try to use with Maggie's had like a sort of screw. The ones we use in our car have like a slot that you can press through. I think some of them have a thing that you can turn to loosen them up. Then there's a 5-point harness, then there's the ones that clip in the back like Maggie's, and then there's some that are even harder to get out of, like that actually have to loop all the way in the back and they connect on the back side of the seat, for kids who are even more of an escape artist than Maggie is. In August, the school district had told this boy's mother that there would be a school district employee who would be riding the bus with him every day, or an attendant that would be on the bus with him every day, but that had not happened. And now this incident happens where he is thrown into the windshield. Now the school is asking for 4 to 5 days while they hire an attendant. I feel awful for both the boy and the bus driver, because it's not the bus driver's fault that the district hadn't hired someone or put him on a bus that could meet his needs. So all in all, it just sounds from this story like a really, really tough situation. I would be seriously upset if I was the family. I would be seriously upset if I was the bus driver too. They put her or him, I think it said her, in an unsafe situation. It put everyone in an unsafe situation because they didn't follow his IEP. Next up, we're talking about Ohio. The State Medical Board of Ohio voted Wednesday against approving medical marijuana to treat autism and anxiety. They say that this is due to a lack of clinical trials. Due to a lack of clinical trials, the medical board decided that there's not enough available evidence for them to justify recommending drugs to treat those conditions. The legislature in Ohio, when they passed the medical marijuana program in 2016, they listed 21 qualifying conditions for which someone could use medical marijuana. Anxiety and autism weren't on that list, but things like chronic pain and post-traumatic stress disorder are. And then they gave the medical board the power to expand on that. This article says that the researchers who have conducted studies cite in the advocate's position that their work isn't conclusive, largely because marijuana is still illegal under federal law, and that limits their testing on humans. The committee felt that the evidence in favor of approval was largely anecdotal and reversed an earlier vote that recommended approval. They felt that there should be a consensus among medical authorities and that they don't have that at this point. And another factor was that they don't feel that it's healthy for developing brains and that they didn't have the power to approve something and say that it was only for adults. So that is this week's news from Ohio. And this was a study that I'm really excited to talk about because it's a study that Tessie was in. And today I saw this on the study's website or Facebook page, and it says that basically the title is Longitudinal EEG Power in the First Postnatal Year Differentiates Autism Outcomes. That's a mouthful. Basically, the abstract says, it's going to be really hard to just narrow this down. They looked at kids who were 3 months old to 36 months old. That's why Tessie just completed the study a few months ago. And they did EEGs of the kids at different points from 3 months old to 36 months old. And some of the infants were at low risk for autism, and some of the infants were like Tessie were at high risk for autism because they had a sibling who was on the spectrum. The study says that the delta and gamma frequencies on the EEG consistently distinguish infants with autism spectrum diagnoses from others, particularly in the first 12 months. Okay, so in trying to understand that, I decided to look at what gamma and delta brainwaves on EEGs are. I'm not sure how much this helps, but I was just curious because I thought it might help us understand what they were saying in the study. They said by looking at the delta and gamma waves in the study, they could tell which infants in the first 12 months of life were on the autism spectrum. And so the gamma brainwaves have the fastest brain activity from what I've read, and they're responsible for cognitive functioning, learning, memory, and information processing. And then the delta brainwaves on an EEG are slow and loud brainwaves. They generated the deepest meditation and dreamless sleep. They suspend external awareness and are the source of empathy. And I mean, again, that's just from like Googling, what is this? So take it with a grain of salt. I was just trying to look that up to understand a little bit better what were the parts of the study that were different in the EEG results of kids who are on the spectrum like Tessie from neurotypical kids in the same study. I find it really interesting. I probably say that like 10 times every time we do this though, sorry. And lastly for today, I found a really interesting article in Medical Express that says those with autism make good social scientists. This one comes from Yale in the Journal of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It said those with ASD traits are as good or even slightly better social psychologists than people who do not have traits of autism. People with ASD traits seem to be able to analyze how people in general will react in social situations, even if they have difficulty judging the mental states of those individuals. They analyze the results of questionnaires taken by 6,595 respondents in 104 countries. Participants attempted to predict how people in general will react in a social situation. An example of the questions would be, do people feel more responsible for their behavior in groups than as individuals? No. Does catharsis work? If I am angry, will taking out my hostilities on a stuffed doll make me feel better? No. And on average, do people work harder in groups or as individuals? The answer is as individuals. Those with ASD traits, that's how they're phrasing it, scored slightly better than those who did not have those traits. They think because often people on the spectrum are very good at viewing situations analytically. So was there any interesting autism news that caught your eye this week that I didn't mention? Did anything interesting happen in your neck of the woods that you'd like to share with us here today? That is it for today. If you like this video, we'd love it if you'd give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in all things autism, we'd love it if you'd hit subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.